For the vast stretch of human history, life did not need a guidebook. It was the guide. In the Paleolithic world, life's purpose was immediate and unquestioned: survive. The rhythm of existence was dictated by nature, the hunt, the harvest, the seasons, the clan. Meaning was woven into the fabric of daily life through animism, the belief that spirits inhabited all things. The world was sacred, and humanity's role was to navigate its will through ritual and respect. There was no separation between the sacred and the profane. Life was a whole, demanding, and complete system. This unity began to fracture with the dawn of civilization. The agricultural revolution allowed for surplus, cities, and social stratification. For the first time, people lived in large, impersonal societies under kings and priests. The direct animistic connection to the world was replaced by structured, state-sponsored religions. In ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, religion became the primary guide for life. It provided cosmic order, ma'at, and divine law, the Code of Hammurabi, offering stability and moral structure against the chaos of nature and human society. Life had a prescribed purpose: to fulfill one's role in the divine hierarchy and appease the gods through piety and ritual. However, the system had a critical flaw. It was primarily external. Its focus was on social order, correct action, and ritual purity. The inner world of the individual, their doubts, their personal suffering, their unconscious impulses, what we might call the shadow, was largely ignored or was seen as a source of sin to be suppressed. The system provided order, but often at the cost of wholeness. Then came the meaning crisis. Around the first millennium BCE, across the globe, a profound shift occurred: the Axial Age. In Greece, philosophers like Socrates began questioning tradition, declaring the unexamined life is not worth living. In India, the Buddha identified universal suffering and sought a path to end it that was personal and experiential, not solely ritualistic. In Judea, prophets internalized morality, focusing on the heart's intention rather than just outward compliance. This was the birth of the conscious search for personal meaning. People were no longer content to simply follow the inherited path. They began to suffer from the questions themselves. Why is there suffering? What is my purpose? Is this all there is? The old, external guides were no longer sufficient for this new, internal hunger. The dominant response to this crisis in the West was the maturation and spread of universal religions, Christianity and Islam. They offered powerful answers: a personal relationship with a single God, a clear moral binary, salvation, and an ultimate purpose in the afterlife. For millions, this resolved the crisis. It provided a comprehensive and authoritative how-to-live guide. Yet, the same tension remained. The focus was often on transcendence, escaping the flawed material world to reach a perfect spiritual one. The shadow self was still to be conquered. The material world often denigrated, and the individual's journey was one of submission to the divine will. It is in this context that alchemy emerged, not as a mainstream solution, but as a profound and esoteric third path. Beginning in Hellenistic Egypt and flowering in medieval Europe, alchemy presented itself as a practical, material science. But for its true practitioners, it was always something more. It took the crisis of meaning and offered a unique methodology that the other paths lacked. Alchemy is a multifaceted philosophical and proto-scientific tradition, best understood not as a failed attempt at chemistry, but as a sacred art aimed at achieving perfection, both in matter and in the soul. While its external goal was famously the transmutation of base metals like lead into noble gold and the creation of the Philosopher's Stone, its internal esoteric purpose was the spiritual transformation of the alchemists themselves. This great work, or magnum opus, was a journey of purification, death, and rebirth, symbolically mapped onto a series of color stages and chemical operations. The foundational process typically involves 4 key stages. Nigredo, the blackening. This is the initial stage of petrification. And dissolution. Represented by the color black, it signifies a descent into chaos, confusion, and the confronting of one's own shadow, or primal nature. The old, impure self must first be broken down and reduced to its essential, chaotic state, prima materia, before transformation can begin. Albedo, the whitening. Following the blackness comes the whitening, a stage of purification and washing. The chaotic matter of the Nigredo is cleansed, leading to clarity, illumination, and a lunar-like coolness and reflection. Psychologically, this represents the emergence of insight and the purification of the soul after the confrontation with its darker aspects. Citrinatus, the yellowing. Often seen as the dawning of the solar light. This stage represents the integration of spiritual wisdom and awakening of the inner gold. It is the stage where the purified soul begins to understand its true nature and connection to the cosmos, moving from lunar reflection to solar consciousness. Rubedo, the reddening. The final and culminating stage is the reddening. It represents the total fusion of opposites, spirit and matter, conscious and unconscious, male and female. The result is the creation of the Philosopher's Stone, a symbol of ultimate wholeness, perfected consciousness, and the achievement of the true and enduring self. The alchemist, having undergone this profound journey, attains a state of unified being. This process was never linear, but a spiraling, cyclical journey of death and rebirth, where the laboratory work was a mirror for the inner work of the soul, aiming not for material wealth, but for the goal of self-realization. The entire alchemical opus, with its meticulously detailed stages of Nigredo, Albedo, and Rubedo, remains a beautiful but theoretical map, an empty laboratory without the essential animating force that compels one to enter and begin the work. This force is the Daimon, the inner genius or divine spark. It is not a passive belief but an active, urgent calling from the depth of the soul. The Daimon is the fire itself, manifesting as a sacred discontent, a relentless yearning for meaning that makes the comforts of ordinary life feel like a prison. It is the voice that transforms suffering from a burden to be avoided into a prima materia to be worked upon. It is the emotional and psychic energy that fuels the quest, the why that makes the how worthwhile. Without this inner compulsion, the journey of alchemy is impossible to truly start. For one would lack the necessary hunger to seek the stone and the fortitude to endure the darkness required to find it. The Daimon is the first and most personal ingredient, the secret fire that ignites the entire process of transformation. While the call of the Daimon provides the essential spark for the alchemical journey, this transformative fire cannot burn without a sacred container to hold it. The vessel, or the vas philosophorum, This vessel is far more than a physical flask. It is the consciously constructed life support system, the practical and psychological womb that sustains the alchemist through the volatile stages of inner dissolution and rebirth. It encompasses the creation of a protected sacred space, temenos, the maintenance of a grounded and stable external life, a circle of tolerant relationships, and the diligent care of the physical body itself. Without this strong, containing vessel, the chaos of the Nigredo risks spiraling into pathological despair. The insight of sublimation becomes ungrounded fantasy, and the entire work collapses, as the seeker lacks the necessary stability to endure the profound internal pressures of transformation. Thus, the deliberate building of this container is not a preliminary step, but the very foundation upon which the soul's gold can be safely forged. With the understanding of the process as a map, the urgent call of the Daimon as the engine, and the stability of the alchemical vessel as the sacred container, the great work can truly begin to take tangible shape. This triad forms the holy trinity of practical alchemy: direction, motivation, and grounding. Now, the theoretical stages of Nigredo, Albedo, and Rubedo cease to be mere concepts and become a lived reality within the secure confines of the self-built womb. The Daimon's fire, once a restless and potentially destructive force, is now channeled into a fortified vessel, where it can safely generate the heat necessary for calcination without causing catastrophic breakdown. Guided by the map and sustained by the vessel, the alchemist can consciously and courageously descend into the necessary chaos, trusting that the container will hold. It is at this precise convergence, where will, wisdom, and world align, that the first matter of the soul is no longer passively endured, but actively engaged, and the long spiraling transmutation from passive lead into active, living gold authentically begins. Let us start with calcination, the inaugural and often shocking stage of Nigredo. If the Daimon is the spark and the vessel is the crucible, then calcination is the first roaring fire. This is the process of radical deconstruction, where the ego's attachments, inherited beliefs, and superficial identities are subjected to intense heat and burned down to their essential ash. It is a psychological and spiritual incineration, fueled by the very suffering and existential questioning the Daimon forces us to confront. In this fire, the pursuit of wealth, social status, and even comforting spiritual certainties are revealed as illusory. Their comforting, numbing power utterly destroyed. What remains is not nothingness, but a base, humbled and purified substance. The stark realization of one's own fundamental poverty, and the haunting question that is both the fuel and the residue of the fire. When all that I thought I was is ash, what then am I? This scorched and open ground, barren though it may seem, is the only foundation upon which an authentic self can be built. For example, a high-powered lawyer who has built their entire identity on success, prestige, and financial gain suddenly finds themselves utterly depleted. The late nights, the ruthless competition, and the constant pressure, which once felt empowering, now feel meaningless. The fire of their ambition has burned them out from the inside. The identity of a successful lawyer is reduced to ash, leaving them with a crushing question: if I am not my job and my title, who am I? A parent loses a child. The profound grief incinerates their previous understanding of the world as a fair, orderly, or meaningful place. All their beliefs in a benevolent God and everything happens for a reason, and the future they had planned are consumed in the fire of this loss. They are left in the pure, black agony of the Nigredo, stripped of every comforting illusion they once held. A person who was raised in a strict fundamentalist religion begins to encounter compelling evidence and perspectives that contradict their dogma. This creates an intense internal conflict. The fire of doubt, their once unshakable belief system, which provided all their answers and a clear moral framework, is slowly burning away. They are left in a state of spiritual vertigo, where the old truths are ash and nothing yet has taken their place. An athlete who has trained their whole life for the Olympics fails to qualify or suffers a career-ending injury. In an instant, the future they had worked towards, the identity of the champion, and the purpose that structured their everyday are obliterated. The fire of this failure calcinized their dream, leaving them with a void where their purpose once lived. In each case, a core identity is destroyed. The successful professional, the protected parent, the certain believer, and the future champion. The why is incinerated. The motivation, money, faith, victory, a predictable future that drove them are revealed as insufficient or false. What remains is ash, a state of humility, confusion, despair, and raw, unadorned being. This is not the end, but the essential beginning. This ash, this state of having nothing left to lose, and no identity to defend, is the fertile open ground from which a true, self-authored life can eventually grow. This is calcination, the necessary, painful, and transformative fire that proves you are more than your possessions, your roles, or your beliefs. After the fire of calcination reduces the ego to ash, the next critical stage begins: solution or dissolution. Solution is the subsequent stage of washing away the remaining ash with the purifying waters of the unconscious. Where calcination is a masculine, fiery, and active deconstruction, solution is a feminine, fluid, and receptive immersion. The hardened, calcified residue of the old self, the pride, the intellectual certainties, the lingering attachments are dissolved in the emotional and psychic waters that now rise to the surface. This is often experienced as a period of deep emotional release, profound confusion, or a flood of dreams and fantasies that defy logical analysis. The seeker, stripped of their defenses by the initial fire, now finds themselves plunged into an ocean of the soul, where boundaries blur and the contents of the personal and collective unconscious begin to swirl around them. It is a necessary drowning. The conscious mind must relinquish its final control and be dissolved so that its essential salts can be separated from the impurities. This stage is not about doing, but about allowing the tears to fall, the dreams to speak, and the deep, often chaotic inner world to cleanse the soul of its last vestiges of rigidity, preparing the raw, liquefied spirit for the eventual coagulation into a new, more authentic form. In the stage of solution, where the conscious mind is dissolved and the ego's structures are washed away, the individual is plunged into the raw, unstructured flow of the unconscious. Here, intellectual understanding is useless. One cannot think their way through the ocean. This is where dream analysis and active imagination become the vital, non-rational vessels of this phase of the journey. Dreams are not mere random firings of the brain. They are the direct, symbolic communication from the depth of your psyche, providing a map of the inner landscape when all outer landmarks have been erased. By diligently recording and interpreting these dreams, the seeker begins to differentiate the figures and themes of their inner world, the shadow, the anima animus, the wise old man, allowing the unconscious to reveal its structures and intent. Furthermore, active imagination is the practice of consciously engaging these symbols in a living dialogue. It is the act of stepping into the dreamscape while awake, asking the threatening figure what it represents, or listening to the wisdom of the inner guide. This is not passive reception, but an alchemical operation in itself. It is the means by which the dissolved contents of the psyche are stirred, related to, and ultimately integrated. Without these practices, the stage of solution risks being chaotic and potentially a destructive flood, a mere breakdown. With them, it becomes a purposeful dissolution, a sacred baptism where the waters of the unconscious are not just endured, but consciously engaged, purifying the soul and preparing its essential salts for the rebirth to come. Having passed through the fires of calcination and the waters of solution, we arrive at the crucial stage of coagulation. Coagulation is the sacred act of reconstruction. It is the process by the purified insights, symbolic figures, and liberated energies from the inner world are precipitated out of their fluid state and given solid, tangible form in outer reality. This is where the alchemist moves from passive recipient to active co-creator. The wisdom gleaned from dream analysis and active imagination is no longer just an internal comfort. It becomes the blueprint for action. For instance, the inner confrontation with one's shadow in solution might now coagulate as the firm setting of boundaries with a toxic family member. The vision of an inner guide might crystallize into the concrete decision to leave a soulless job and pursue a vocation aligned with one's true purpose. This stage is the embodiment of meaning. It is the building of the philosophical womb in the material world, where one's daily life, relationships, and work are consciously structured to nourish and protect the nascent self. In coagulation, the seeker becomes the architect of their own existence, finally giving durable, worldly substance to the gold forged in the depth of their psyche. Coagulation is the stage where the insight from your own inner work cease to be just thoughts and feelings and begin to crystallize into your tangible daily life. It is the practical embodiment of your new understanding. For example, it is the act of cleaning and reorganizing your chaotic apartment after a period of internal confusion, creating an external environment that reflects the inner clarity you've achieved. In a relationship, it's the moment you stop just understanding your communication issues and instead proactively schedule a difficult, honest conversation, giving concrete form to the intention for a healthier connection. Coagulation is, therefore, the alchemy of action. It is the process where the gold of your inner real world is forged into the gold of the consciously lived life, proving that the transformation was not just an idea, but is now a fact of your existence.
Let us now ascend to the final stage, sublimation. Sublimation is the alchemical process of spiritualization, where the substance forged in coagulation is transformed into something rarer and more refined. If coagulation grounded the spirit into the world, sublimation elevates the embodied self to grasp the patterns that connect the personal to the cosmic. This is not an escape from reality, but a profound shift in perspective, a rising above the flat landscape of literal facts to perceive the hidden geometry of meaning beneath. In everyday life, this manifests as a moment of profound synthesis. The entrepreneur, who after building a successful company, Coagulation, suddenly sees their work not just as a business, but as a vessel for a larger purpose, like fostering community or advancing human knowledge. It is the artist who, after mastering their technique, now creates from a place of inspired vision, feeling themselves as a conduit for a universal creative force. It is the parent who, immersed in the daily grind of child rearing, has a sudden, luminous understanding of their role in the vast, interconnected cycle of life and love. This stage generates a theory of everything for the individual, where personal suffering is seen as a part of a universal Rubedo, and personal joy as a glimpse of Rubedo. However, this ascent carries the crucial danger of inflation, mistaking the elevated understanding for personal grandeur. The key is to hold this visionary awareness lightly, allowing it to illuminate one's path without severing the connection to the grounded vessel that makes the entire journey possible. Sublimation is the breath of insight that fills the sails, providing the direction for the final voyage toward wholeness. In the stage of sublimation, the coherent self forged in coagulation now turns its gaze upward and outward, seeking to understand the cosmic context of its own existence. This is where the individual may develop their own personal, metaphysical theory of everything. For example, after a life of varied experiences, suffering loss, calcination, exploring therapy and dreams, solution, and building a meaningful career and family, coagulation, a person might suddenly experience a profound moment of synthesis. Gazing at the night sky, they no longer see just stars and emptiness, but a single, unfolding consciousness experiencing itself through the infinite diversity of life. They see their own past pain not as a random tragedy, but as a necessary Rubedo that allowed for their spiritual rebirth. The laws of physics, the patterns of history, and the struggles of their own soul appear as different expressions of the same fundamental principle, a universal movement toward wholeness and complexity. Their personal theory of everything becomes a unifying narrative where spirit and matter are one, where their individual life is a microcosm of the cosmos itself, and where every action is imbued with cosmic significance. This is not a dry, intellectual hypothesis, but a living, felt knowledge that provides ultimate context and meaning. The crucial task in the stage, however, is to hold this grand vision without succumbing to inflation. To remember that one is a part of this divine totality, not its sole author, thus grounding the most transcendent insight in humble embodiment. To view these stages as a linear checklist is to misunderstand the nature of inner transformation. The journey is indeed circumambulation, a spiraling, recursive path where we revisit the same essential stages, but each time from a higher vantage point of understanding, like ascending a spiral staircase. We do not simply complete calcination and never feel its fire again. Rather, the process is cyclical and context-dependent. You may have achieved a profound state of coagulation in your career, only to have a personal relationship fall apart, plunging you back into the fiery despair and confusion of calcination, and the emotional flood of solution. The difference is, you now approach this new darkness with the hard-won knowledge that it is a phase, not a final state. A moment of sublimation where you feel a cosmic connection might later reveal a hidden arrogance, a form of inflation. This realization becomes the catalyst for a more subtle and profound calcination, where the spiritual ego is burned away, leading to a purer, humbler coagulation. Your first calcination might have been about burning away your identity as a successful person. Years later, after achieving a new level of spiritual understanding, you may undergo another calcination that burns away your identity as an enlightened seeker. The process is the same, but the subject matter is progressively refined. You are not repeating a failure, you are deepening the work. Each major life transition, each new level of challenge demands a return to the fires of Rubedo, the chaos and destruction, the waters of Albedo, the purification and clarity, and the light of Citrinatus, the dawning wisdom. We circle these stages, learning their lessons more deeply each time, integrating their truths into the very fabric of our being. This circumambulation is not a sign of stalling, but of profound progress. It is the process of the Philosopher's Stone, polishing itself. With each spiral, you integrate more of your being, until the stages are no longer tumultuous events that you pass through, but recognized as eternal aspects of a conscious, evolving life. The goal is not to exit the cycle, but to learn to dance within its turns, understanding that the journey itself, the perpetual transformation, is the destination. But this circumambulation does indeed lead to a threshold, a qualitative shift in the very nature of existence. After sufficient cycles of breaking down and building up of despair and insight, a permanent foundation is established within the psyche. This is Rubedo, the achievement of the Philosopher's Stone. This is not merely another state, but the final unification. It is the point where the seeker and the sought become one. Your inner truth and your outer life are in seamless alignment. The struggle of meaning ceases because you have become a manifestation of meaning. The peace of Albedo becomes a constant inner climate, not a temporary respite. The wisdom of Citrinatus is no longer just understood, but lived effortlessly. This is wholeness. It is not a state of perfection or the end of life's challenges, but a state of unshakable inner integrity. You are no longer shattered by the Rubedo because you contain it within your wholeness. You are no longer inflated by the Citrinatus because it is grounded in your being. You have become the stone itself, the catalyst for your own continuous growth and a touchstone of authentic presence in the world. The goal of the great work was never to escape the cycle, but to transform your relationship to it so completely that you realize you are the gold all along. This state of Rubedo, the embodiment of the Philosopher's Stone, is indeed the best possible state of existence. It is not a fleeting peak, experience, or a temporary enlightenment, but a fundamental and enduring mode of being. This is the how to live achieved. The relentless seeking ceases because you have arrived at the source of meaning within yourself. The inner conflict between shadow and light, spirit and matter, self and world, dissolves into a dynamic, harmonious whole. Life's inevitable suffering and joys no longer shatter you or inflate you. They are met with the resilience of the stone itself, a deep, unshakable inner peace, a compassionate wisdom that operates without dogma, and a profound connection to the flow of existence. You are no longer a spectator to life, nor a victim to it, but a conscious co-creator, fully integrated and fully alive. This is the culmination of the great work, to live at last as a complete human being. And so, the magnum opus, the great work of the soul, finds its conclusion not in an end, but in a glorious and perpetual beginning. The long pilgrimage through the chaotic darkness of the Rubedo, the clarifying waters of the Albedo, and the golden dawn of the Citrinatus reveals its ultimate purpose in the Rubedo, a final radiant wholeness. The seeker discovers that the Philosopher's Stone was never a distant object to be manufactured, but the very substance of the self, perfected and fully realized. This is the sacred marriage of spirit and matter, the point where the individual spark recognizes itself as an integral part of the divine flame. The alchemist, having passed through the fire of the flood, emerges not as a conqueror of mystery, but as its living embodiment. The laboratory is dismantled for the entire world to become its vessel. The search of meaning is complete, not because all questions are answered, but because the soul has learned to dwell poetically through wisdom within the great, unanswerable mystery of existence. The base lead of a fragmented life has been irrevocably transmuted. The seeker has become the gold, and in doing so has discovered that they were gold all along. The profound and deliberate obscurity that characterizes the alchemical tradition, with its labyrinthine texts and arcane symbology, was not a mere affectation, but a sophisticated and multi-layered strategy essential to its survival and purpose. The symbolic language itself was the only medium capable of conveying alchemy's truths. Where dogma and linear prose addressed the rational, conscious mind with static statements, alchemical symbols such as the Ouroboros serpent or the sacred marriage of king and queen function as living, protein gateways to the unconscious. They are the primordial language of the soul, speaking in the tongue of archetypes and capable of expressing the ineffable processes of psychic transformation that defy literal description. Thus, the obscurity of alchemy was its greatest pedagogical tool. It transformed the study from a passive reception of knowledge into an active, participatory engagement, where the relentless quest to unravel the symbol became the first and most vital stage of alchemical work itself, ensuring that the seeker was fundamentally transformed long before the final secret of the stone was ever revealed.